What if your peaceful 120-acre ranch became the testing ground for a secret government program disguised as an HOA? I thought escaping to the countryside meant freedom from orders and chaos. But when a fake homeowners association targeted my land with escalating threats, from signs to armed raids, I uncovered something far darker than petty bureaucracy. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. "What in God's name is that?" I muttered, squinting at the white plastic monstrosity zip tied to my fence like an unwanted growth. Just moments before, the only sound had been the buzz of June bugs and buddies soft panting beside me on the porch steps. 120 acres of quiet, hard-won freedom I'd paid for in sweat and scars, escaping a life defined by orders and chaos. No bosses, no forewarned AM calls. Just me, my dog, my goats, Queenie included, watching from her dusty patch, and a tractor older than my own damn knees. The kind of silence that lets your soul uncoil. The sign screamed absurdity. "Notice property under review. Simmons Valley. HO. Compliance required. HOA. Out here." I stood there blinking, half expecting it to vanish. It didn't. Annoyed, I ripped the cheap plastic down, tossed it into the burn barrel, and chalked it up to bored kids playing HOA cosplay. That was mistake number 1, underestimating the venom of petty power. Mistake number 2 was assuming it would stop. 2 days later, a dust cloud heralded an SUV the color of sterile gauze, parking halfway across my gravel drive. Out stepped a woman, radiating forced cheerfulness. Pastel pink, pressed car keys, mirrored sunglasses, and the ubiquitous clipboard clutched like a sidearm. "Hi there," she chirped, ignoring the land entirely, her gaze fixed on me like I was a stain to be removed. "I'm Elena Vance, HOA president. Just welcoming you." "HOA," I blinked. "Simmons Valley Homeowners Association." She smiled wider, a predatory glint behind the mirrors. "Maintaining visual and environmental standards." I actually laughed. "Lady, the only visual standard out here is dodging cow pies." She didn't flinch, rattling off fake bylaws about fencing, livestock ratios, even noise thresholds. She handed me a manila envelope labeled "Welcome Packet." "Action required." "We don't cite the goats," she said sweetly, before spinning on an orthopedic heel. "Just their owners." Inside were pages of fabricated rules, diagrams of my barn circled in red. Apparently, my satellite dish was a visual obstruction. I burned it. The signs came back bigger, laminated, nailed this time. Then came the men, 2 of them, late 30s, matching car keys, vests with iron-on patches, reading HOA patrol, walking my fence line with walkie-talkies like they were securing a border. I stepped off the porch. They froze. "Conducting a compliance sweep," one mumbled nervously. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. "Leave." They did, but one dropped his clipboard. Inside crude patrol maps, properties marked with red X's. Mine was labeled Target Alpha High Resistance. A chill, cold, and unfamiliar on my own land snaked down my spine. "This wasn't a game," I called Deputy Miller. "Ellen Vance." Miller sighed. "Oh yeah, we know her. Tried to cite the feed store for rural noise disturbance last year. No such HOA exists, Ethan. But she's persistent. Watch yourself." Persistent didn't feel like the right word anymore. Calculating felt closer, and I realized I needed to prepare, not for kids, but for whatever came next. Miller's warning hung heavy in the quiet dark long after his call ended. Persistent felt too small a word for Ellen Vance. Calculating was closer, maybe predatory. The clipboard with its Target Alpha label wasn't a joke. It was a battle plan. I spent the next few evenings rigging motion sensors along the fence lines, low and hidden in the scrub. Trail cams watched the gates and the barn approach, wired back to a monitor in the kitchen. Nothing lethal, just enough light and noise to announce that this land, my land, had teeth. I hoped it would be enough to deter playground bullies. I was wrong. Trouble I remembered from another life has a distinct sound when it's trying to be quiet. A measured crunch on gravel. Too coordinated for deer. Too light for a truck. I heard it before dawn 2 nights later. The air still and black. No panic. Just muscle memory taking over. Boots on. Yesterday's coffee reheated. A glance out the side window confirmed it. 5 shadows moving in a lazy arc towards the barn. Vests, car keys, headlamps bobbing like discount special forces. One clutched that damned clipboard again. A crackle from a cheap radio drifted on the still air. Team Alpha in position. Begin sweep. Target is presumed armed. Presumed armed. I almost chuckled. Osama bin Farmer, apparently. But the humor died fast. That old hum was back, the low thrum of awareness I hadn't felt since Kandahar. Threat assessment, response, protocols. I moved to the mudroom, slipped on the old field coat with the remote trigger in the pocket. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see their faces. They crossed the second fence line, confident, quiet, until one tripped the wire I'd buried shallow near the water trough. Click, then boom. Not an explosion, but a sudden, brutal flood of light. High-beam floodlights I'd mounted on the barn roof blazed on, turning midnight into noon. Simultaneously, sirens screamed from 4 different points, bouncing off the barn walls, creating a disorienting echo chamber. Chaos erupted. 2 guys dropped flat. One yelped and dove behind the trough. Another stumbled right into Queenie's enclosure fence. Bad move. My normally placid goat lowered her head, rammed him squarely in the thigh, and flipped him onto his back. She stood over him, head tilted as if demanding an explanation. I stepped onto the porch, sipping my coffee, letting the cacophony wash over the scene. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice even. "Planning to announce yourselves this time? Or were you hoping for the element of surprise again?" Clipboard guy staggered to his feet, trying to regain composure. "We are acting under HA Emergency Code 7A to seize non-compliant property," he blustered. "Code 7A. I raised an eyebrow, taking a step down. "Did y'all make that up in a coloring book? Smells like desperation and cheap ink." "We are empowered by community vote," another one stammered, fumbling with something that looked suspiciously like a taser. "This is a citizens' enforcement zone. We are within operational bounds." "You're in my yard," I stated calmly, my voice dropping. "Armed, threatening seizure under fake laws printed on a library computer." Clipboard guy thrust a folder at me. "This document authorizes." I snatched it. Half the pages were marked draft. One had a coffee ring and what looked suspiciously like melted cheese stuck to the corner. "This looks like it was written by a sleep-deprived 10th grader with control issues." Suddenly, new lights, red and blue this time, pulsed down the driveway. Gravel crunched under official tires. Deputy Miller's cruiser rolled in slow and loud. The HOA enforcers froze. Clipboard guy hissed, "Abort?" Too late. Miller stepped out, squinting into the blinding lights, taking in the scene. One fake cop still being stared down by Queenie, another practically digging his face into the dirt. He looked at me, deadpan. "Callahan, what the hell is this?" "Pre-dawn theater," I replied, gesturing with my mug. "Opening act. HOASWAT team." Miller turned to the group. "Hands where I can see them. Drop the clipboards." One actually tried to argue. "We're acting under civilian compliance jurisdiction." Miller strode over, ripped the cheap badge off the man's vest, and held it up. "Compliance Officer Tier 2. Buddy, you're lucky it doesn't say Malcop." He picked up a dropped binder. "Leather-bound, homemade. Simmons Valley Compliance Authority. Internal Codex." He flipped through laminated pages, charts, violation classes. Class 1, fencing misalignment. Class 2, unauthorized rooster activity. He snapped it shut. "I've seen cults with fewer rules." He looked back at the trembling men. "Who told you to enforce this protocol?" "Karen?" one finally mumbled. "Vance." "Of course. 3 arrests, 2 citations for trespassing. Later, Miller found another list tucked inside Vance's ridiculous Codex. A spreadsheet. Names. Mine highlighted obstructionist, high threat. Others crossed out. Neighbors who'd sold up recently. Miller whistled low. This isn't just cosplay, Ethan. It's coordinated, targeted. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I'll call in a fraud investigator, but you should know she's not quitting. People like this. They doubled down. He was right. The lawsuit landed 2 days later, delivered by a courier, thick and smelling of expensive paper, filed by a real lawyer in the city. Hostile disruption of a sanctioned community action, undermining volunteer enforcement personnel, intentional obstruction. It was impressively worded nonsense. Someone with deep pockets was funding Elena Vance. Tucked inside, separate from the legal jargon, was a typed list. Potential witnesses, contacts. One name jumped out, circled with a single chilling word next to it. Informant. Mark Jenkins. The neighbor who'd helped me raise my barn shared beers on my porch. My gut clenched. The betrayal felt colder than the pre-dawn air. I confronted him later that day, finding him fixing a fence post, deliberately not looking towards my property. I didn't raise my voice, just held up the paper. "Mark, what the hell is this?" He wouldn't meet my eyes, his knuckles white on the post driver. "Ethan, she said they threatened things." His voice trailed off into the dirt between his worn boots. "Said if I didn't report on who came and went, I'd be next on the list. Non-compliant." He finally looked up, misery etched on his face. "I got kids, Ethan. A mortgage." I just nodded once, a bitter taste in my mouth, and walked away. Vance didn't stop there. She launched a full-blown propaganda campaign. Flyers appeared staked along the county road. Aerial shots of my ranch labeled Zone B, non-compliant, high risk. Bullet points listed my sins: unauthorized livestock, illegal fencing, documented verbal hostility. Neighbors were advised to avoid unsanctioned contact. And it worked. Waves turned into averted gazes. The feed store owner quietly added a search charge to my bill. Vance held a rally in her driveway. Maybe 15 lost souls attending, some already wearing HOA safety vests. She pointed across the road at me, watching silently, and declared me a threat to community order. Then came the laminated notice slipped under my door. Resident classification Tier 3 critical non-compliant demands included painting my barn, neutral gray, removing livestock, and attending a re-education seminar in her garage. Location? Karen's garage. I nearly choked. This was Orwell with a polo shirt. The harassment turned uglier. 2 of my trail cams went dark. Then a third cut wires. A white sedan with tinted windows idled down the road for hours, registered to something called Community Horizon Outreach. Miller traced it back to a shell nonprofit, directed by Vance herself. The final straw came that night. I heard Buddy whimpering near the barn, a sound that cut right through me. I found him behind the ATV, shaking, holding up one paw. Blood dark against his black fur. A deep, clean gash on his paw pad. My breath caught. Kneeling beside him, heart pounding with a sudden cold dread. I swept the floor nearby. My fingers found them. Jagged shards of green bottle glass, deliberately scattered, almost hidden near the rear barn door where he liked to sleep. Not an accident. A message. A cold, sharp fury, unlike anything I'd felt before, settled deep in my chest. They hadn't just crossed a line. They'd shredded it, dipped it in poison, and spat on it. Picking Buddy up gently, whispering reassurances, I carried him inside. This wasn't about bylaws or visual standards anymore. This was vicious. This was personal. Miller came out, took samples, his face grim. This was deliberate, Ethan. A message. I got it, I said, my voice tight. That night I didn't sleep. I gathered everything. The video from the fake raid, the ridiculous seizure warrants, Vance's flyers, the surveillance logs from Miller, photos of Buddy's pour, copies of the HOA's insane law book. I uploaded it all to a public video platform with a simple caption. When the HOA thinks they're the FBI, Simmons Valley, meet Ellen Vance. Then I hit publish. Time to see how they like the floodlights. The internet did what the law hadn't yet. At least, not fully. The video exploded. Within hours, comments flooded in. Support, outrage, and chillingly similar stories from other rural corners of the country. Shares climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Vance's online defenders evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Half her compliance team, according to Miller, had resigned via text message. For a day or two, there was a sense of vindication, a feeling that maybe the absurdity had finally imploded under its own weight. Then, 2 days after the video went viral, silence fell as her sensible walking shoes crunched on my gravel. No SUV, no backup, no clipboard. Just Elena Vance walking up my drive, a plain manila folder held loosely at her side. She stopped 10 FT away, her face unreadable behind the ever-present sunglasses. The usual forced cheerfulness replaced by something colder, almost reptilian. "You think this is about goats?" Her voice was low, flat. "You think this ends with me?" I said nothing, just watched her. My hand instinctively resting near where Buddy lay, sleeping on the porch, his bandaged paw tucked underneath him. She stepped closer, the silence stretching. "You've kicked something you don't understand, Callahan." She thrust the folder at me. "It wasn't a request." "This isn't local," she whispered, a strange intensity in her voice. Then she turned sharply and walked away, leaving me standing there in the afternoon sun with the damn thing in my hand, feeling a prickle of unease far colder than before. The folder sat on my kitchen table for 6 hours before I opened it. Not because I was afraid exactly, but because I had a sinking feeling I already knew what it meant, what she meant. It wasn't her usual laminated garbage printed at the library. This was thick paper, proper formatting, official government headers, some redacted, others starkly clear. Agency abbreviations I hadn't seen used openly in a decade. The top page, Riedel Initiative, Rural Behavioral Management Phase 2 Implementation Protocols. My blood ran cold. I flipped through the pages. Memos detailing communication strategies, contact lists with names I recognized, people I'd worked tangentially with years ago, back when my world involved briefings in windowless rooms, not fixing fences. There were budget outlines, jurisdiction maps that vaguely mirrored the Tri-County area, references to subject cohorts and compliance metrics. This wasn't Ellen Vance playing power games. This was doctrine. This was organized, and somehow horrifyingly it felt familiar. I called Miller. He was at my place within the hour. I didn't say anything, just slid the folder across the table. He opened it, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page he turned. "Where did you get this?" "She gave it to me," I said quietly. Walked up, handed it over, said I'd kick something I couldn't stop. Miller closed the folder slowly, his face grim. He made a call. The county attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Hayes, arrived an hour later with an investigator and a portable scanner. They took the folder apart, scanned every page, ran the headers, verified the watermarks and signature stamps. Then Hayes looked directly at me, her gaze piercing. "Did you know about this program, Mr. Callahan?" I hesitated, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Not this iteration," I admitted slowly, the words tasting like ash. "But I knew some of the people who built the early framework years ago. I wrote a report, an analysis on potential vulnerabilities and recalibration techniques in rural command structures post-instability. My own words twisted and weaponized." Hayes and Miller exchanged a look that spoke volumes. My past wasn't just catching up. It had been waiting for me here all along. Things moved fast after that. Within 24 hours, they had a warrant based on the folder's contents, linking Vance to potential federal offenses beyond simple harassment. Miller and 2 state agents served it the next morning. Vance, Miller told me later, opened the door wearing that same smug smirk, clipboard in hand like diplomatic immunity. It didn't last long. You wouldn't believe the setup, Ethan. Miller's voice was strained over the phone later that day. Hidden room behind a false bookshelf panel in her study like a damn spy movie. Wall-to-wall binders, whiteboard covered in names. Faces, your face, Callahan, right in the center. Schedules, rotation charts for surveillance teams. A bank of monitors linked to hidden cameras, including one with a live feed. Paused, pointed right at your barn door. He paused, taking a breath. They had files, Ethan. Thick files, psychological profiles. Yours rated you defiant, autonomous, high vigilance, recommended specific pattern disruption, and social isolation tactics. Others were labeled compliant, exit achieved, or pending disruption. That poor woman, the one who sold her place cheap and moved out last month, her file was marked pending disruption. It's sick. They found a wall map, Miller continued, his voice low and angry. 3 counties, pins everywhere, red, blue, black, each labeled with a code. P1 probationary assessment, P2 persuasion, coercion phase, P3 physical relocation encouraged. This wasn't just an HOA gone rogue. It was calculated, coordinated psychological warfare. The county attorney filed federal charges that afternoon. Conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud, illegal surveillance, impersonating public officials. But the most chilling discovery came from the digital forensics team examining Vance's computers. One of the primary digital signatures authorizing the Phase 2 proposal belonged to General Mark Harrison, retired 3-star, an old intel officer I'd crossed paths with years ago during a joint task force briefing. Last I heard, he was running a very private, very lucrative consulting firm in D.C. The network wasn't just local, it reached high. And they found mention, Miller told me, of one last heavily encrypted drive in Vance's hidden office, labeled simply Phase 4 Contingency. Contingency for what? Failure, resistance, whatever it meant. It implied they had planned for things to go wrong. Planned for someone like me. And the fight, I suspected, was far from over. It was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. Knowing about a Phase 4 contingency didn't make waiting for it any easier. The quiet on the ranch felt brittle now, stretched thin over a silent dread. Learning General Harrison, a man I vaguely knew from my past life, had signed off on this perversion, twisted something cold in my gut. This wasn't just some rogue program, it had roots. I reinforced the barn door hinges. Double-checked the frequencies on the old theft deterrent system I'd rigged years ago for heavy equipment haulers. A system designed for noise and disorientation, not harm. Sleep came in shallow fits. Buddy pressed close beside the bed, his ears twitching at every night sound. Then, just after 4:00 a.m., 3 days after Miller's call about the house search, I heard the new sound. Not the clumsy buzz of Vance's earlier toys. This was a low, efficient hum, cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. Faster, smaller than the previous drone. Smarter, it didn't hover. It swept low over the barn roof, buzzed the treine bordering the west pasture, and vanished as quickly as it appeared. 15 minutes later, doing a tense perimeter check with a high-powered flashlight, as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, I found it near the north fence line where the drone had lingered. A perfect circle, maybe 3F to cross, burned black into the damp earth. 2 clean slash lines cut through the middle like a precise, deliberate X. The same symbol Miller's contacts had found marked on other non-compliant properties in adjacent counties. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a marking. They were coming. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't send another laminated notice. They just walked in. I spotted them on the southwest thermal cam first. 3 distinct heat signatures emerging from the woods where no vehicle could easily reach. They hadn't driven up. They'd been waiting. Now they were approaching the driveway, moving with a fluid coordination. Vance's clumsy patrols had utterly lacked. Black vests, heavier this time, lightly armored, dark boots, muted walkie-talkies clipped high. One still held a clipboard. an absurd nod to their bureaucratic origins. But the other two had rifles. Real ones. Clean, modern sporting rifles slung tightly, handled with familiarity. I didn't panic. Shut down the laptop displaying the cam feeds, locked the barn securely from the inside switch, walked calmly back to the porch, took a sip of the coffee I'd learned to keep perpetually warm. I watched them approach, 3 shadows solidifying in the gloom. They stopped at the edge of the gravel drive, fanned out slightly. They didn't speak. Neither did I. Finally, clipboard guy stepped forward. Same empty vessel feeling as before, but overlaid with a harder certainty. "We're here for seizure protocol," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of the nervous energy Vance's previous crew had shown. He held up a single laminated page like a priest holding a scripture. "You've failed to comply with re-education notices," he droned. "Your vehicle and property are listed as forfeitable under Emergency Clause B9. Clause B9. I kept my voice level, scanning the other two. One was twitchy, eyes darting towards the dark tree line, hand constantly adjusting the rifle sling. The other was naturally calm, eyes glassy, focused not on me, but slightly past me towards the door behind me. Dangerous. Another bedtime story from Elelanina's garage. "You've been designated as a primary resistance node," clipboard guy continued, ignoring my barb. The calm one took half a step forward. The twitchy one shifted his weight. "You're outnumbered, Callahan. Don't make this hard." "Tell me something," I said, taking one deliberate step forward myself, shifting my weight onto the balls of my feet. "Who trained you?" Clipboard guy hesitated for a fraction of a second. That's when I knew for sure. Not law enforcement, not military believers, zealots trained just enough to be dangerous. They took another step forward together. I stepped back 1 pace onto the porch, my thumb finding the silent trigger on the heavy-duty watch I hadn't worn in years. A low hiss. Then a solid thump as buried steel barriers thick enough to stop a truck rose hydraulically from the driveway, blocking any vehicle exit or easy retreat on foot. Motion sensors pinged silently. Floodlights ignited. Not the steady beams from before, but strobing, disorienting reds and whites, pulsing at irregular intervals designed to overload the senses and induce vertigo. The effect was immediate. Clipboard guy threw an arm over his eyes. Twitchy guy staggered, raising his rifle instinctively, blinded by the strobes. That was his mistake. Under the cover of the first whump of a flashbang, deploying automatically from the deck. Eaves, pure sound and pressure. No shrapnel. I moved low, fast down the side steps, rolling under the railing. I came up as twitchy guys stumbled towards the gravel. I grabbed the rifle barrel, twisted hard, using his momentum and my full weight to drive his shoulder brutally into the ground. He went down without a fight, the air knocked out of him, the rifle skittering away. The calm one had turned, starting to run, but froze as the piercing, oscillating shriek of the old equipment theft sirens fired up from 4 directional speakers across the field, coded to bounce off the barn and create a bewildering storm of echoes. He clapped his hands to his ears, momentarily paralyzed by the sonic assault. Just as I was about to move on him, new lights swept the scene. Steady headlights this time. "Weapons down now!" Deputy Miller's voice cut through the siren's wail. His cruiser slid to a halt behind the steel barrier. Sidearm drawn. Backup spilled out behind him. Real law, real response. Clipboard guy, still disoriented, fumbled for something at his belt. Miller fired a single warning shot, not into the air but into the dirt, kicking up a puff of dust between the man's boots. I said, "Now!" They dropped their weapons. All 3. Then, incredibly, 4 more emerged slowly from the woods. Hands raised high, 7 in total. Armed, trained, poorly, perhaps, but trained enough. As Miller and his deputies began cuffing them, Miller found a badge clipped inside one of the vests. He held it up, showing me later. Sleek, Metallic, professional-looking enforcement Tier 1 Phase 4 certified. They weren't just random thugs. They were designated units. Just before they loaded him into the cruiser, the calm one, the one whose eyes never seemed to blink during the chaos, met my gaze through the bars. A small chilling smile touched his lips. "Phase 4 isn't about you," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the idling engines. I didn't speak, just held his gaze. "You think this was about land?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping lower still. "It's about pattern disruption." He paused, the smile widening slightly. "You're not the enemy, Callahan. You're the prototype." Then he winked just once before the deputy pushed him firmly inside the car. Prototype. The word echoed in the sudden quiet, colder than the burned symbol on the ground, colder than the steel barriers still standing guard in my driveway. The flashing lights receded, leaving the siren's echo ghosting in the pre-dawn air. The cleanup was methodical, deputies collecting weapons, bagging evidence, hauling away the 7 members of Phase 4 Ground Team Unit 7. Miller confirmed later they were mostly ghosts. Expertly forged IDs, minimal traceable records, invoking obscure operational security clauses when questioned, trained, funded, and disposable. But the calm one's words, prototype, wouldn't leave me. They resonated with the cold precision of that burned symbol on my land, hinting at a purpose far beyond simple intimidation or land acquisition. It drew me back inevitably to the final piece Miller had pulled from Vance's hidden office during the search. The small encrypted hard drive labeled only in black marker Callahan. Contingency prototype. The answers, I felt certain, were on that drive. It took a few hours, bypassing security layers I recognized with a grim, unwelcome familiarity from my previous life. Then the screen flashed once. A logo appeared. OPRM, Operational Rural Management. A program name I hadn't heard spoken in over a decade because I'd helped write parts of the initial concept papers, the threat assessments on rural network vulnerabilities, long before it apparently metastasized into this monstrosity. And there they were, scanned copies of my own memos, my analyses twisted into blueprints for infiltration, conditioning, pressure, and correction. Drone footage logs time-stamped over months. Audio files captured by hidden microphones near my barn. Conversations with Miller, even me, whistling tunelessly while fixing fence posts. My classification glowed on the screen. Subject, Callahan. Classification, autonomous, strategic influence, high potential. Resistance, confirmed, adaptive. They hadn't just watched me, they dissected me. Then came the audio file that made my stomach turn. My own voice, younger, more certain, captured from a secure briefing years ago, outlining protocol suggestions for identifying and managing outlier behavior clusters in unstable regions. They'd used my own damn playbook against me. Files confirmed Ellen Vance was merely the local instrument, the beta test lead. Recruited and managed through the Community Horizon Outreach Shell nonprofit, funded indirectly through channels linked back to General Harrison's consulting firm. I wasn't the primary enemy. I was the primary test subject. Then the final file, a video labeled Message Tier Alpha. Elena Vance filled the screen, calm, composed, smiling faintly like she was delivering a church announcement. "If you're watching this, Ethan," she began, her voice smooth, "then you saw the truth. I didn't start this, but I believed in the necessity of order. Still do." Her eyes held mine through the screen. "People like you. You don't obey. You disrupt. You resist the pattern. That's why we needed you. You showed us precisely what real resistance looks like." She leaned slightly closer. "And how eventually to break it." The screen went black. "Not break me," I realized with cold fury. "Break resistance. I was the model. I compiled everything. The drive's contents, my own logs, Miller's reports, the evidence from both raids. I bypassed the press, knowing how easily OPRM's network could muddy the waters. I filed a formal, detailed federal whistleblower complaint the next day, naming names, including General Harrison, attaching irrefutable proof. The fallout was swift, messy, and mostly happened behind closed doors. Oversight committees convened. Heads rolled quietly in agencies I hadn't thought about in years. OPRRM was officially decommissioned again. Elena Vance faced a new raft of federal indictments, her expensive lawyer suddenly much less effective. Life on the ranch settled into a new kind of quiet. The fences stayed up, the goats still yelled. Buddy recovered, though he'd always walk with a slight limp, a permanent reminder. But the silence felt different now, charged. Sometimes Buddy still growls low in his chest when an unfamiliar truck slows unaccountably at the gate. It never stops, but it never doesn't pause. Messages still trickle in occasionally from strangers in other states. It started here, too. They called it a volunteer coalition. The documents looked real. I tell them what little I can. Don't wait. Document everything. If they've already drawn the map, you're already on it. Miller decrypted one final, deeply buried email from the Callahan Drive a few weeks later. No body, no signature, just a subject line. Reassignment, pilot zone, Midwest Beta coordinates. Coordinates for a flat, unremarkable stretch of farmland hundreds of miles away. Phase 4 hadn't ended here. It had just moved down the list, looking for the next pattern to disrupt, the next prototype to study. They thought I was the variable, the disruption, the glitch in their machine. Maybe I was. Or maybe, as the calm operative said, I was just the prototype that proved the pattern, forcing them to adapt, refine, and continue. Quieter now, underground, the fight wasn't over. Out here, under the wide sky, the silence no longer felt like peace. It felt like a held breath,